There are corners of history so dense they absorb all light. I am your narrator, and this is Van to Black History. Today, we descend into the mathematical impossibility that funded an empire. The official records claim Spain discovered vast gold reserves in Tenochtitlan. The mathematics tell a different story. For 5 centuries, historians have repeated the same narrative about Spanish conquistadors finding rooms filled with Aztec gold. But when you examine the actual shipping manifests, the weight calculations, and the economic records, the numbers do not add up. Someone has been lying about where that gold actually came from. The Spanish colonial shipping records are preserved in the Archive of the Indies in Seville. Between 1521 and 1525, these manifests document 47 tons of gold shipped from Veracruz to Spain. The problem becomes clear when you examine Aztec tribute records from the same period. Their entire empire possessed an estimated 12 tons of worked gold. The mathematics are impossible. Something else was happening in Mexico. The official Spanish account describes the discovery of vast treasure chambers in Tenochtitlan. Hernán Cortés reported finding rooms filled with gold artifacts, bars, and ceremonial objects. These reports became the foundation for every subsequent historical narrative about Aztec wealth. The descriptions were detailed, consistent, and completely fabricated. The Spanish needed a story that would legitimize the quantities of gold they were actually extracting through other means. The Spanish accounts contain internal contradictions that expose the fabrication. Cortés claimed to have found the main treasure chamber in Moctezuma's palace, but Pedro de Alvarado reported discovering the same chamber in the temple of Huitzilopochtli. Both men described identical quantities of gold in completely different locations. The Spanish were creating multiple versions of the same fictional discovery. And here is where the evidence gets specific. The pattern of deception extends beyond treasure chamber stories. Spanish mining permits from 1522 through 1540 show systematic concealment of extraction sites. The permits reference locations using coded designations rather than actual place names. Indigenous testimony, when it survived Spanish censorship, describes forced labor operations at sites that do not appear on any official maps. The Spanish were running clandestine mining operations while using Aztec treasure myths as cover. We are almost at what the documents actually show. But first, the scale. Between 1520 and 1550, Spanish colonial administration produced over 3,000 mining-related documents. Of these, only 47 contain actual geographical coordinates. The rest use coded designations that were systematically declassified and destroyed in 1768. The Spanish maintained a parallel classification system for resource extraction that operated independently of official colonial governance. This was not administrative oversight. This was institutional conspiracy. The pieces. The Aztec gold story was a cover operation for systematic resource extraction using enslaved indigenous labor. The Spanish created fictional treasure discoveries to legitimize ongoing mining operations that actually relied on forced labor at concealed sites. The mathematical impossibility of extracted quantities versus reported Aztec reserves was not an error. It was evidence of the true source. Spain was not an error. It was evidence of the true source. Spain was not discovering gold. Spain was manufacturing it through industrial slavery. Here is what actually happened. Spain established a parallel colonial administration dedicated exclusively to resource extraction. This system operated independently of official governance using coded documentation and classified sites. Indigenous populations were systematically enslaved for mining operations at locations deliberately omitted from official maps. The Aztec treasure mythology was created to provide legal justification for quantities of gold that actually came from decades of forced labor extraction. The operation continued for 3 centuries. The implications extend beyond colonial history. The Spanish model of systematic resource extraction, disguised as legitimate discovery, became the template for subsequent colonial powers. The fabrication of indigenous wealth narratives to justify ongoing extraction operations was replicated across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Modern resource extraction in developing nations continues to use versions of the same legal and narrative frameworks developed by Spanish colonial administrators. The Aztec gold conspiracy was not an isolated historical. The Spanish Empire perfected the systematic extraction of resources through fabricated historical narratives and parallel administrative structures. This template was replicated by every subsequent colonial power and continues to operate through contemporary international resource extraction frameworks. The Aztec gold conspiracy was not a historical anomaly, but the foundational prototype for centuries of systematic economic warfare disguised as legitimate development. The gold flowed for 3 centuries. The mines were never found. The Aztecs were blamed for wealth they never possessed. If you dare to keep exploring what others prefer to keep buried, subscribe and activate the bell. In this archive, dossiers never fully close. Stay in the shadows.